And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Friday, the 25th of March 2022. Right here in Brisbane today, it is 26 degrees and sunny. Hey, it's wonderful to have your company. So good to see you on this Friday. Hey, thank God it's Friday, and there's lots that's happening today. There is the launch of the Australia-India Chamber of Commerce today in Brisbane. So there's a national movement, but the launch of the Brisbane chapter will be today. We'll bring to you update on that maybe tomorrow. But tomorrow we have that interview with Ark Haas at 10 a.m. Well, right now let's get on with the news segment and see what's making news on this day. Well, what's happening with COVID? Didn't we think that, with the floods and everything, that we had left it behind? Well, we might have done so, but it's not too far behind.
With most of Australia reopened and the era of lockdowns becoming a distant memory, it's easy to forget the pandemic's not over. But for mum Sarah Weeks in Bathurst, the risk of COVID is always on her mind.
My 2-year-old daughter has cystic fibrosis, so she is high risk.
For 2 years, Sarah's been vigilant about keeping COVID at bay. But now the whole family is in isolation after her other daughter tested positive for COVID following an outbreak at her school.
It's quite a big thing, so we're in panic mode here. My 2-year-old daughter is due to go to Westmead Children's Hospital next week. She was due to start new medication next week. That's all been put on hold because we are now a household contact.
Sarah thinks schools need to be more open with parents about outbreaks.
There's miscommunication between the schools and parents. I don't feel as though we're being told enough information. I would have liked to have been told previously that it's that bad at school. Like, we would have been taking more precaution.
Cases are again on the rise, largely driven by New South Wales, where daily numbers are now in the tens of thousands. The reason is the new subvariant of Omicron, BA2.
Variant, BA2, is more transmissible. So someone with BA2 is more likely to spread it to their household contacts than someone who had BA1. It's referred to as the stealth variant because it's sort of crept up and has now overtaken BA1 as the dominant variant. It doesn't appear to be more severe, to cause more severe disease than Omicron does, which is reassuring.
Also reassuring, experts say, is that hospitalisation and ICU numbers remain low and case numbers aren't as high as earlier this year amid high vaccination rates and more immunity from previous infections.
So that's still a long way from the peak, which was above 100,000 cases a day in mid-January from the original Omicron wave. There may be a further increase, but I'm expecting some increase in hospitalisation, some increase in intensive care numbers, and unfortunately some increase in the number of people dying, but nowhere near to the extent that we saw in the original Omicron wave.
But COVID is still proving deadly. This week it was confirmed that a 2-month-old baby with no underlying conditions died of COVID in a Newcastle hospital in December. Separately, a previously healthy 2-year-old child died of COVID in a Sydney hospital. But of the 243,000 cases in the 0 to 9 age group, only 5 children have died of COVID.
I think it's important that we have this reminder. It's a tragic case, but it is very rare in the context of COVID.
A big change may be coming to isolation rules if National Cabinet gets its way. It's asked the expert health panel to provide advice about whether to scrap the isolation period for household contacts. Infectious diseases expert Greg Dorr says the proposed change would be pragmatic and low risk, but he'd like to see regular rapid antigen testing for household contacts.
I think the benefit of having a more pragmatic approach to household close contacts is you get those people back to work, you get those people back to sort of normal daily living at low risk, given that they test negative in the morning.
For Andrew Javeri, any relaxation would allow his workers to get back on the job sooner. He's already facing shortages at his joinery business with workers off sick.
I think in the last 8 weeks, we've had to reschedule over 90% of projects. the precautionary measures are probably a bit over the top at the moment and they haven't really moved with the times. If you're not positive for COVID, I don't see the reasoning for preventing them to go to work for up to 7 days currently.
The next big test for Australia will be winter, and health authorities are urging people to get their COVID booster shot.
There are going to be people who don't have immunity against flu coming into this winter. It's the overall burden on the healthcare system if there's a big outbreak of flu and a big outbreak of COVID at the same time over winter.
So there we go. As we said, that the Omicron and this new variant is pretty much there. It's not as bad, but, it does still spread quite quickly. The good news is Melbourne has developed the Covet Vaccine, which will be starting trials on patients very, very soon.
Two Melbourne-developed COVID-19 vaccines will soon start patient trials aimed to deliver more powerful second-generation jabs. It's hoped the shots, developed by the Doherty Institute and Monash University, will provide a more targeted attack. Over 100 people will receive the vaccines over the next 3 months.
That is such an exciting development. Let's get more on it and bring in one of the researchers involved, Professor Terry Nolan at the Doherty Institute. Terry, very good morning to you.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning.
Do you want to take us through, in further detail, just what these second-generation jabs involve?
Sure. One is an mRNA vaccine, which comes from our colleagues at Monash, and one is a recombinant protein vaccine, which has been generated by scientists at the Doherty Institute. They're both directed at the SARS coronavirus 2, but not at the whole spike, only at a small proportion of the spike protein, which is the critical bit that attaches to cells. And they are also directed at a variant. In this case, because we started making this vaccine several months ago, the variant being used in the study is the beta variant, which has now been replaced obviously by Omicron and more recently by BA2. But this is really to prove that both these vaccines will actually work. The new technologies allow you to retune the vaccines to whatever variant might be circulating with fairly rapid turnaround. And so we're planning to show that they do work, they're safe, and that they can go into a larger study for licensure if that is the case.
Yeah, so what does this mean if all those hurdles are jumped in terms of offering greater protection to Australians against future variants of COVID, for instance? Yeah,
so this is taking the medium and longer term view. And that's why the subjects in this study, for example, we'll probably come to this in a minute, actually have to have had their third booster dose even to be eligible, because that's the future reality. We have almost no one or very, very few people in Australia now who don't have either immunity from having been vaccinated. That's over 96% of the population over the age of 5. Or they've had the infection itself. So the early studies which were done with the first vaccines in 2020 were in people who had no immunity at all. So that's very different. We're now looking at boosters that will actually take the existing immunity and lift it to a better level that's more focused on protecting against whatever variants are circulating and provide longer protection, so we don't need to be doing boosters as often as might be the case. So that's our target or our ambition in any case.
That's great to hear. And before we go, Terry, on an allied front, how worried should Australians be as we head into winter? We're hearing about the flu coming back after pretty much being wiped out by all the hygiene measures over the last couple of years. How worried should we all be about the double whammy of the flu and new COVID variants as we move into the colder months?
Thanks, Michael. There's always a how worried we should be question, which I never know how to answer other than to say we shouldn't be worried at all, but we should be cautious, careful and sensible about both being properly prepared in time and not waiting for events to unfold and then be behind the 8 ball. But by the same token, we also don't want to assume that everyone needs to keep having frequent boosters and so forth. ATAGI will be releasing advice or very soon, I believe, about a 4th booster dose for the population. The speculation is that is going to be restricted to those older individuals and those who are more vulnerable and not for the whole population. It's not inevitable that everyone will have to keep having boosters, but at the moment it seems more likely than not that will be the case in the future. So no, don't be worried, be prepared, get your flu vaccine, make sure you've had your third dose, and if it does turn out that there's a fourth dose recommendation, especially for the elderly, make sure that happens before the winter.
So get your flu shots in and your boosters in early, especially for the elderly people as we head into the colder months. But as per the expert, there's no reason to be actually really worried. So it's something we now have to deal with it. It is now become a part of life. So yes, we will have to just deal with it and move on with it, won't we? Well, right now, let's take a look at this next news, which is a good news, or welcome news. Traditional owners, celebrate the handing over of their traditional land. So this is wonderful news, and you can just see, the whole community coming together. Just see the smile and the gleam on the faces of the young ones.
It's been such a long time for me and my family. We've been waiting for so long. We got all our kids here, grandkids, our children. We have them all here. We've been sitting and walking.
It's a long journey and a long fight, but finally get there. Time and patience will get you there, and finally here.
Unfortunately, the audio on that wasn't very good, but yeah, of course, it is a wonderful move. And you can see that everyone's coming together to celebrate that move. The next news, not so good, as the search is underway for that missing 4-year-old.
Scanning farmland and thick bush, around 100 people search for any sign of 4-year-old Shayla Phillips on foot, horseback and from above. Described as a healthy and happy little girl, Shayla was wearing pink leggings, a cream top and gumboots when she disappeared. She was last seen playing with the neighbour's 2 dogs in the backyard of her family home at Stormley around 2:30 yesterday afternoon.
That's not an uncommon thing. Shayla knows the dogs well and is very fond of them. The mother went out to check on Shayla after about 30 minutes and found that she and the dogs were not there.
Shayla's disappearance sparked a major search overnight and through the day, involving police, SES, drones, police divers and scent dogs.
Shortly after the search commenced, one of the dogs actually returned to its home nearby. At around 7 p.m, the rescue helicopter actually located one of the other dogs approximately 700 metres from this point, and search efforts were concentrated in that area.
Crews on the ground have been looking in an area up to 1.2 kilometres from the house, the helicopter covering a larger distance.
It doesn't matter where it is, anything that involves children, and especially missing children. It's pretty much the worst case scenario out.
Crews searching in dense bush, farmland and forestry plantations. But the lack of mobile coverage made an already challenging situation more difficult.
It's always a concern when there's an emergency and there's a call out. The local police often struggle to get signal out.
But in this time of need, the local community is banding together to help in any way they can.
You don't have to say very much and they're here.
Shayla's family staying strong throughout the ordeal.
I've spoken to the mother, Bianca, and she's very stoic. She's a strong woman. She's very positive and hopeful that we'll find Shayla.
Really hope that they do find the young one. It is very challenging when you look at the vegetation there, thick forest there, and the lack of the mobile signal. That also is a very challenging thing in today's day and age. We rely so much on technology, so many things that is just based on technology. Everything works that way. If you look at, if you're going to a restaurant or something like that, you can't go without your mobile phone these days, because you could do a check-in. Not only the check-in, most of the restaurants these days, you go sit on the table, there's a barcode, or a little device, you scan your phone into that and order your food through there as well. So this connectivity and the signals is very important. Many devices these days rely on that. Medical fields, police and rescue operations all depend on the availability of that signal. So if that is not available, then all of a sudden we find that we are limited to what we can do. Well, right now, looking at the reef, of course, there's been lots of talks about what's happening with the reef. I have my own personal point of views, but let's take a look at this report before I make my commentary. The footage there covers the bleaching or the so-called bleaching that's taking place on the reef. And of course, therein lies the problem, is because if we keep going there and keep doing things, then it will not go back to its natural state. And there are many things that are under our control and a lot of things that are not under our control. So, human intervention is always troublesome, because once, the fish even there and everything there, they are not in their natural habitat. They've been disturbed with all sorts of things and gadgets. So, it does have an effect. Of course, the debris and wash from other activities, industrial activities, does not help it either. But there are many things that do happen by nature. There are things that evolve. So when we talk about nature, if we leave things to its natural course, then it might be different. If we go about and take our stance, and if we interfere with nature, there are serious consequences which we will have to face. Unfortunately, no audio on that clip there. Right now, let's move on and let's go overseas right now. So for overseas news, Joe Biden has spoken at a NATO conference and in Brussels. Here is that report.
Western leaders have agreed to put more boots on the ground in Eastern Europe after an emergency NATO summit was held overnight in Brussels. The military alliance gathered for the extraordinary meeting to discuss Russia's escalating invasion of Ukraine. It's now been going on for a month. It agreed to establish 4 new battle groups to strengthen regional security in Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria and Romania.
Inside Ukraine, the military says it's destroyed a huge Russian landing ship in a southeastern port city and is pushing back on Russian advances. To Europe Bureau Chief Steve Kinane in Brussels. Steve, US President Joe Biden has just given a press conference with some very strong comments. What's he had to say?
Yeah, it was very interesting, Bridget. He's given that press conference here at NATO HQ in the last hour, and he's not the kind of Western democratic leader who normally subjects himself to a lot of press conferences. So it was interesting to hear what he had to say on a number of different topics. For instance, he said that he thought Russia should be kicked out of the G20. He was asked a question about his conversations with President Xi of China recently, and he said that he made it clear to him that there would be severe economic consequences if China supported Russia. Interesting too what he had to say about whether if Russia used chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine, what would happen? Would the US act? Here is what President Biden said a short time ago.
Clarify on chemical weapons. If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
So a pretty clear response there from President Biden, and there's a lot of people here at NATO who are concerned about the possibility of chemical and biological weapons being used. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, did say when he was walking into the conference at the doorstep today that he was concerned about it. He said that at a press conference. He said he was concerned about it because of the Russian rhetoric around chemical and biological weapons. So that has been certainly something that's been discussed behind closed doors and also out in the open here in Brussels today.
And Steve, the Ukrainian president has called on NATO for more support.
Yeah, he was the one non-NATO leader at this summit, and of course he appeared via video link from a war zone just 2,000 kilometres away. So it was very powerful having him in that room as part of a summit that he's not allowed to be a member of. And during that summit, one thing that was noticeable, Bridget, was he didn't call for a no-fly zone again, but what he did call for was tanks and jets. He said to NATO, why don't you give us 1% of your tanks and jets? Here's what President Zelensky said via video link.
You have at least 20,000 tanks. Ukraine asked for 1% of all your tanks. Give it to us or sell it to us. But we do not have a clear answer yet. The worst thing during this war is not having clear answers to requests for help.
And Bridget, Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, was asked a question about tanks and jets at a press conference here at NATO HQ as well. And he said logistically he thought that would be difficult, but you could tell by the way he answered the question that President Zelensky had been lobbying him in private to try and get tanks and jets to defend cities in Ukraine and defend the Ukrainian people.
Well, as you can see that, the president has been lobbying in private and in public as well. What a task he has on his hand, and, hats off to him, facing up and, lobbying. He's appeared on so many different cabinets and all different nations, and wherever he gets a chance, he does appear by video link and makes that plea. Well, right now, still on a similar topic, let's go to North Korea, where they have been conducting the largest ever missile test.
Japanese authorities say the missile flew for over an hour and covered a distance of around 1,000 kilometres before finally crashing into the Sea of Japan. The launch comes after a flurry of weapons tests in recent weeks, which had prompted warnings from the United States that this was on the cards. It's thought the missile is more powerful than the one Pyongyang launched back in 2017. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un had agreed on a missile test moratorium after talks with then US President Donald Trump, but he declared he was no longer bound by that deal.
The actions carried out by North Korea are a threat to peace and security. North Korea is provoking the international community by escalating its launches, even as the international community is responding to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We absolutely cannot tolerate this.
This launch comes just a couple of weeks after presidential elections in South Korea, where Conservative Yoon Suk-yeol narrowly secured victory. He campaigned on taking a harder and more confrontational approach against North Korea. With so much attention on Ukraine, experts believe Pyongyang may be testing the waters to see what it can get away with, while also trying to demonstrate it's still a geopolitical force.
What an opportunity that he's trying to seize, while the focus is on Ukraine, to do this missile testing and see if he can get away with that without any international commentary. Well, right now it's time to go to our daily India report. With that, let's welcome Himanshu.
Welcome to Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, India rejects the Chinese foreign minister's remarks on Kashmir at the meeting of organizations of Islamic countries. The government of India has rejected as uncalled reference comments made by China's foreign minister at the opening ceremony of the Organization of Islamic Countries meeting being held in Pakistan. India said the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir are entirely the internal affairs of India, strongly adding that China has no locus standi to comment on the matter. Indian Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi said, "We reject the uncalled reference to India by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during his speech at the opening ceremony. Matters related to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir are entirely the internal affairs of India. Other countries, including China, have no locus standi to comment. They should note that India refrains from public judgment of their internal issues." Addressing the OIC meeting on March 22nd, Wang Yi had said China stands ready to work with Islamic countries to promote multipolarity in the world. The 48th Council of the Foreign Ministers of the OIC concluded in Islamabad on 24th March. Indian Oil Corporation buys 3 million barrels of Russian Urals. This is the second purchase of Urals by IOC since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. It bought similar volumes of Urals from Vitol earlier in March 2022 for delivery in May 2022. Indian Oil Corporation, the country's top refiner, bought 3 million barrels of Russian Urals crude oil and 2 million barrels of West African oil through a tender for May loading. Reports said Urals crude has been purchased from trader Vitol on the delivered basis at a discount. This is the second purchase of Urals by IOC since Russia invaded Ukraine on Feb 24th. It bought similar volumes of Urals from Vitol earlier this month for delivery in May. The invasion has prompted a barrage of sanctions that have limited Russia's ability to do business in major currencies and hit several of its banks and state-owned enterprises. India has called for an end to violence in Ukraine but refrained from outright condemnation of Russia, with which it has long-standing political and security ties. The world's third biggest consumer and importer of oil has also not banned Russian oil imports, unlike several Western countries. IOC also purchased 1 million barrels each of Nigerian Usan and Agbami oil from Exxon. India's exports have touched a whopping $400 billion for the first time. Prime Minister Narendra Modi calls it a key milestone in India's journey to become self-reliant or Atmanirbhar. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated people, especially farmers, MSMEs and exporters, as India achieved its target of reaching $400 billion from exports in the current fiscal. The first such achievement was lauded by Modi on Twitter, calling it a key milestone in the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. India's goods exports in FY21 were $298.1 billion. Prime Minister Modi also posted infographics of India achieving the highest ever export target 9 days ahead of the intended deadline. As per the graphic, an average of $46 million worth of exports was done every hour. According to Indian Commerce Ministry, in December 2021 achieved exports of $37 billion, its highest ever in a month, a jump of 37% from December 2020. The corresponding figures from 12 months prior were recorded at over $27.22 billion. Indian External Affairs Minister and Oman Foreign Minister reaffirm commitment to close strategic partnership between the two countries. Foreign Minister of Oman, Saeed Badr bin Hamas bin Hamad Al Busaidi, is in India on a 2-day visit on March 23rd and 24th. Oman is an important diaspora country in the Gulf. This is the first visit of Badr to India after his appointment as Foreign Minister. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and his Omani counterpart reiterated their commitment to the close strategic partnership between the two nations. Importantly, the meeting with a Muslim country leader comes at a time when the neighboring country Pakistan at the OIC meeting raked up the issue of Kashmir. On the other hand, the UN delegation was in Srinagar for deep investments in the region. India and Oman are united by the waters of the Arabian Sea and have an important role in maritime safety and security in the region. Both the ministers welcomed the decision to implement the proposals for joint cooperation in space, mining, maritime and science and technology sectors. They agreed for holding the joint commission meeting at the level of commerce ministers, India-Oman strategic consultative group meeting and strategic dialogue at an early date. Moreover, the sides also welcomed the timely renewal of long-standing MOUs on military cooperation and maritime issues between India and Oman. Both also welcomed the holding of the 11th Joint Military Cooperation Committee meeting in New Delhi in February 2022, which was co-chaired by the Defence Secretary of India and Secretary General of the Ministry of Defence of Oman. Jaishankar thanked the Omani side for taking care of all the Indians that are residing in Oman during the pandemic and lauded the cooperation between the countries during the COVID pandemic. Oman was the first country in the region to accord approval to indigenously developed Covet Vaccine, attesting to the close and friendly relations between both countries. The ministers expressed gratitude to each other's countries for timely assistance during the pandemic. India's assistance in supplying critical medicines, including hydrochloroquine and Covet Vaccine, and Oman's assistance in providing ventilators, oxygen concentrators and other critical equipment during India's second phase was a humanitarian gesture well received by both sides. Both the ministers felt a need to enhance the momentum in trade and investment linkages as the economies of both countries showed strong signs of post-pandemic recovery. Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla addresses the UN Security Council meeting on cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States. He also submitted 4 specific suggestions for consideration by the UN Security Council. Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla arrived in New York to participate in the UN Security Council meeting on cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States. While addressing the meeting, he briefed on cooperation between the UN and regional and sub-regional organizations and congratulated the delegation of the UAE for their steadfast stewardship of the Council for this month, as well as for successfully piloting the presidential statement in the Council on the UN League of Arab States cooperation. India and the Arab world share a civilization relationship underpinned by a strong people-to-people relations and commercial and cultural ties. Trade between India and the Arab region through the Indian Ocean has flourished for several centuries, even before the advent of modern commerce. The Indian rupee was legal tender in parts of the Arab world not very long ago. The Arab world countries host more than 9 million Indians. India and the League of Arab States signed an MOU 2 decades ago for institutionalizing a regular dialogue process to forge a partnership for the future. It led to the creation of the India League of Arab States Forum, during which progressive cooperation in several fields like energy, environmental protection, investment, food security, science and technology and human resource development was agreed upon. The first edition of the Arab India Energy Forum successfully convened a few months ago. Shringla said India underlines that the League of Arab States can further contribute to our joint endeavor for peace for the sake of the people of the region in general and women and minorities. He submitted 4 proposals and specific suggestions for consideration by the Council. First, there must be greater policy synergy between the two organizations, regular and frequent consultations with the League of Arab States. Its members on peace initiatives in the region would contribute towards achieving common solutions and meaningful outcomes. Second, efforts must be made to achieve comprehensive coordination at the field level, especially through regular coordination between the UN Special Envoys and Special Representatives and the League of Arab States. Third, engagement with the League and its members in post-conflict peace building through reconstruction and economic development is equally important. And fourth, ensuring the stability of the countries concerned and the region and the welfare of the people, especially women and minorities, should be at the forefront of all such efforts. The cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States is of critical importance when it comes to the Middle East peace process. Both organizations must take concerted efforts to support the reactivation of the Middle East peace process in line with the two-state solution based on the internationally agreed framework and previous agreements between the parties. Trailer of Bollywood star Abhishek Bachchan's film Dasween, translated into English means 10th, has been released. The film also stars Yami Gautam and Nimrat Kaur. Producers Maddock Films often share a slice of life kind of films, and Dasween is no exception. In the film, Abhishek Bachchan essays the role of Chief Minister of Haryana while Nimrat Kaur plays his wife. Yami Gautam is a police officer, jailer, who keeps an eye on the prisoners. In the trailer, Abhishek is arrested by the police while his wife Nimrat takes over her husband's duties as the Chief Minister. Even in jail, Abhishek acts like the boss who wants everything according to his wish. Yami treats him like any other prisoner. But things get a little interesting when Abhishek decides to complete his education and strives hard in the jail, at least to pass the 10th board. The movie is set for a direct-to-OTT release and will premiere on Netflix on April 7th. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And thank you very much for that, Himanshu. That's a wonderful report there. Well, right now, let's take a look at what's happening in the weekend. Today, well, ladies and gentlemen, the upcoming functions and events that are taking place here in Brisbane and around, also in Sydney, that mega concert. And to talk about that, tomorrow we will have Akash coming in, joining us here. Akash Lodhia, the promoter for that mega event of Pankaj-ji, which will take place at the Opera House. What's happening in the weekend also is, this is the weekend of our, the Music Junction, and this Music Junction we pay tribute to Lataji, and to do that we have none other than our own Nightingale, Usha Sivikullaji, and she will be coming with some very, very beautiful numbers, specially prepared. He is a rehearsal number of what you might get to see.
Shri Ram, Shri Ram. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Karana Bhava Bhaya Darunam. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Karana Bhava Bhaya Darunam. Navakanjalochana Kanjamukha Kara Kanjapada Kanjarunam. Shri Ram, Shri Ram. Kandarva Aganita Amita Chavi Navanila Nirada Sundaram Patapita Manahu Tadita Ruchi Suchi Naumi Janaka Sudharam. Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Bhajamana Harana Bhava Bhaya Darunam. Shri Ram, Shri
So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll leave you with that glimpse. That's a part of what you can expect. And the show will be presented, of course, with the ever-popular RJ Savi. And that's coming on Sunday night at 6 p.m. So, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you are ready to witness this tribute to Lataji, a beautifully presented program by RJ Savi, and of course the singer, and and we will be featuring Usha Sivikula, whom we know as the Nightingale of Brisbane. So it will be a wonderful program, and I've seen some of the selection of the songs, that it will be just an amazing show. I would like to make sure that you all pass on the message and tune in and witness that tribute to Lataji, presented by RJ Savi, featuring Usha Sivikula. So until tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to say goodbye. It's been wonderful having your company as usual. Thank you so much for joining in.